whatever beauty there may be that my eyes do see, may your beauty ever be inside this heart. Whatever work my hands can share, with best effort and with care, may I always find you here inside this heart. Through every joy and sorrow that I face, on every road I walk, through every place, with every step I take, your endless grace guides me ever on, gives me every song. So many stars do shine on me, so many prayers of peace there be. May that peace be found in me within this heart, and may that peace fill up the world, from ocean's depths to stars a world, be found in every boy and girl, in every heart. Through every joy and sorrow that I face, on every road I walk, through every place, with every step I take, your endless grace guides me ever on, fills me up with every song. However long life stands will be, your rhythms play so endlessly, and move my feet continually in your dance. I give to you my every song, my mind and heart to you belong, and when at last life stands is done, to you I'll come. Through every joy and sorrow that I face, on every road I walk, through every place, with every step I take, your endless grace guides me ever on, gives me every song. Whatever beauty there may be that my eyes do see, may your beauty ever be inside this heart. Whatever work my hands can share, with best effort and with care, may I always find you here inside this heart, inside this heart.
Good morning, everyone. I'm kind of overwhelmed by this task this morning because I realized what it was. I just spent this last week camping in the Rocky Mountains, in Rocky Mountain National Park, actually, and down around the sand dunes. And was confronted with, oh, God, a beauty that I couldn't absorb, that I just really realized the lack of the senses. You know, it was really the first time in my life that I felt so distinctly the limitations of experience. You know, you can't get it all in. You can't appreciate what you're looking at. You can only take the meter all the way to the edge, and then it just starts clicking on the side, you know. And that's how I was feeling about it. And I've realized that, you know, these years in the monastery and these years of practice have maybe increased where that meter can go just a little bit, but I see the need for this spiritual transcendence, for this ability to go beyond what the mind can hold, to go beyond what the senses can let in, and to go to, you know, that place where Eckhart Tolle says that space of no mind, or that space of no thought, where you become aware of an infinite amount of knowledge that can't fit into the triad of the mind, you know, that subject-object relationship, that can't be broken into 5 small chunks to fit through the senses, that this self, this divinity, this wholeness, this oneness that we're confronted with, wow, what a beautiful thing to try and talk about, what a beautiful thing to try and convey. I titled this lecture, Seeing the Stars from Where You Are, because I remember standing out here on the gravel one night and looking up and being amazed after spending a little bit too much time in Hollywood, where there's 2 or 3 stars in the sky on a good night, and coming here and realizing that there's just a few more of them. And to sit there and ponder that these stars have more or less, of course, astronomers would make a better argument for change, but to me, they've always been the stars. They've been a constant in life, and in all the places that I've lived around the world, I would look and see the stars at night. And we're celebrating the 125th anniversary of the Ramakrishna order and the 75th anniversary of the convents this year. And I was confronted with the idea that I'm standing under the same sky that those who have now joined the stars lived under, and that we live in the same moment, the moment that hasn't yet ended, hasn't yet begun. This, what Eckhart Tolle calls the power of now, this eternal moment, this experience of eternity, this unchanging isness within which everything happens. So under these, equating that with the stars, equating that with this, the space and timelessness that provides the background for this changing world, is something that we all walk through, that in studying our history, appreciating our history, finding our inspiration in our history, we ourselves are history. And that in another 100 years, when they start celebrating the 225th anniversary or the 175th anniversary of the convent, that we will be a part of that celebration, that our lives, our hearts, and our successes in touching that divinity that made a change in us, that inspired a world around us, will become part of that history. You know, I took a walk at the sand dunes up on this big hill, and I found all of these trees that had obviously just grown in a very harsh environment and had just twisted and turned in on themselves, and some of them only had one branch that was still alive. And I was sitting there and looking at them and marveling as I was kind of stroking the odd curls and curves of that tree, that every attempt of that tree to reach the sun was marked in its branches, in its boughs. Every turn that it had taken to reach up or to bend with the wind was all a part of its life in that moment. And it made me reflect on just our own history, our own experiences are written right here in ourselves. And it gave me a great comfort to think that I won't have to miss this beauty. You know, if ever there comes a day where I sit in an old folks' home, unable to move, that I don't have to be afraid of what I left behind, because it's impossible. to leave it behind. It is what you are. You carry with it all of your attempts to reach the sun, to reach for the stars. Hafiz, one of my favorite poems, really expresses this here. He says, light will someday split you open. Even if your life is now a cage, little by little, you will turn into stars. Little by little, you will turn into the whole sweet, amorous universe. Love will surely burst you wide open into an unfettered, booming new galaxy. You will become so free in a wonderful, secret, and pure love that flows from a conscious, one-pointed, infinite light. Even then, my dear, the beloved will have fulfilled just a fraction of a promise that he has written upon your heart. For a divine seed, the crown of destiny, is hidden and sown on an ancient fertile plain that you hold the title to. Oh, look again within yourself, for I know you were once the elegant host to all the marvels in creation. When your soul begins to ever bloom and laugh and to spin in eternal ecstasy, oh, little by little, you will turn into God. What a wonderful summary of the promise, the quest of spiritual life, to open our heart and to open our mind and to just be able to, at least once in our life, to express love without a motive, to one time do something without a purpose or a reason, just for the sake of love, just for the sake of being. Vivekananda says about karma yoga, that the yoga of work, he says, strive all of your life to do one thing, one act of service from which you gain absolutely nothing. He says at that moment you will have your realization that you'll see your nature, you'll see God. It's very much like repeating your mantra, repeating that name of God over and over. Each time we try to stretch our mind wider open to understand just a little bit more what that name, what that sound points at, what it indicates, to realize that the mind and the body will never be able to hold it because the mind and the body are within it. See the stars from where you are. Understand this eternal, unchanging reality, this space that allows for objects and this silence that allows for words and altogether allows for beauty and being. Vivekananda says about Ramakrishna, he says, the time was right for one to be born who in one body would have the brilliant intellect of Shankara and the wonderfully expansive, infinite heart of Chaitanya. That this wonderful intellect of Shankara would allow this sage to tell us of things that can't be spoken, to try and describe ideas that can't be held or contained, by telling us stories of frogs in the well, and by telling us stories of pots and clayed vessels being broken or being put underwater, telling us about the clay being made into mice and being made into elephants. And through all of this, trying to tell us in our state of bewilderment something true, something meaningful, something that will help us push against the limits, to break out of our comforts, to put away our familiar suffering, to be willing to walk into non-suffering, non-knowing, non-limited, and to be that ever-free, ever-pure self that is constantly trying to push out through our personalities, through our actions, to express that one act of uncaused love. The time is right for this one to be born, one who would see in every sect the same Spirit working, the same God, one who would see God in every being, one whose heart would wait for the poor and for the weak, for the outcast, for the downtrodden, for everyone in this world, and at the same time, whose grand, brilliant intellect conceived of such noble thoughts as would harmonize all conflicting sects, not only in India, but outside of India, and bring a marvelous harmony, the universal religion of head and heart, into existence. That he would take all of these forces in the world, all of these egos pressing and poking and banging against one another, insisting on their own way, their own right, and from that create a tree, twisted in a beautiful sense of harmony as it reaches for truth, as it reaches for the light, as it reaches for the sun, so that everyone could walk by and see and appreciate in all of the different forces of all the religions, of all the atheism, of all the science, of all the quests for knowing, for finding, for touching, just a modicum of truth, that all of them might form a whole, a beautiful tree that can be appreciated, not fought or resisted or resented, but something that speaks of love, speaks of a quest, speaks of a principle that creates beauty. There is no chance for the welfare of the world unless the condition of women is improved, he says. It is not possible for a bird to fly on only one wing. Hence, in the Ramakrishna incarnation, the acceptance of a woman as the guru. Hence, to his preaching the motherhood of women as the representations of the Divine Mother. That transcending this idea of gender, this idea of sex, this idea of separation, looking at the heart and the spirit and the beauty within, and finding that respect through empathy, through understanding, through togetherness, that birds do not fly with a single wing. It's always odd as a man to talk about the idea of respect for women or women's rights, because I really feel and understand that mostly we're the cause of the problem, in the way that we perspected. The idea that at the end of the day I can push you over so I'm right. That's the world, unfortunately, that we live in. The world where if I can fight and win that fight, then I'm right. I get to write history. I get to be remembered. And how as souls, as spiritual beings, as people that are created from a single light, that we can look at each other and see that, and not let the mind find these distinctions, categorize us, and then build improper relationships that are out of balance, but that we might look at each other and see humanity and see our efforts together. Ramakrishna says yes to the guruhood of woman, and yes to the divinity of that woman. Sri Ramakrishna came to teach the religion of today, constructive and not destructive. He had to go afresh to nature to ask for facts, and he got scientific religion, which never says believe, but says see. I see, and you too can see. That we look at religions not in an effort to find their distinctions, not in efforts to find the differences and to study and emphasize the differences, but to look for the sameness. If we could just realize how similar we are, that there's not a religion out there that doesn't put love at the top of the hill. How is it that a religion with love at the top of the hill will be fighting with anyone else, with anything else? To see that sameness, to construct bridges and appreciation, to learn in Vedanta, for us, this task of being able to walk into a mosque, walk into a church, a temple, or the beach, or the mountains, and to see divinity, to see that commonality, to catch that glimmer of that light that we know is one, and to learn to worship through each other's eyes in an appreciation of the efforts of all of these religions that have over thousands and thousands of years spent eons of thought, trying to understand, an unconditioned love, a love that can't be seen in this world because everything broken into pieces, everything forced in through 5 senses, everything reconstructed in a mind through relationship. And to see the oneness that the mind is struggling to conceive of, to find the unity that the mind is trying to reconstruct from the 5 broken pieces of the senses. This is the message of Sri Ramakrishna to the modern world. Do not care for doctrines. Do not care for dogmas or sects or churches or temples. They count for a little compared with the essence of the existence in each and every man and woman, which is spirituality, that we, born of spirit, and the more this is developed in a person, the more powerful is she for good. Earn that first. Acquire that. Criticize no one, for all doctrines and all creeds have some good in them. Show by your lives that religion does not mean words, does not mean names or sects, but that it means spiritual realization. It means seeing that one eternal spirit within, to understand and know that which is watching your mind think, to know and understand that which is listening to your ears, to know and understand that which is experiencing the touches of a body, but that which has remained ever unchanged, trying only to be expressive of the love that is its nature, expressive of the wisdom that is its nature, all in this seeming fleeting, changing and yet unchanged moment. Show by your lives that religion does not mean words or names or sects, but that it means spiritual realization, the seeing, the understanding, the changing, the transformation, the birthing into what has always been. Vivekananda says, my master's message to mankind is be spiritual and realize truth for yourself. He would have you give up for the sake of your fellow beings. He would have you cease talking about love for your brother and to set out to work to prove by your words. The time has come for renunciation, for realization. And then you will see the harmony in all the religions of the world. You will know that there is no need of any quarrel, and then only will you be able to help humanity. To understand yourself as spirit, it's basically trying to understand that you're dreaming while you're dreaming. To know that this little point of reference in the dream, to know this little self in the dream, has forgotten the nature of the dreamer, has forgotten that itself and the world it is experiencing lie within the mind of the dreamer. And the nature of that dreamer is love. The nature of that dreamer is freedom, is knowledge, bliss absolute. To come to realize in yourself that part of you that has been the same through all of the ages that you've experienced, through all the different bodies that you've experienced. We say one body, but has it been one body? You know, this oversized now thing was once held in my mother's arms. You know, I was born premature and was put in a shoebox on the oven door to keep me warm when I was a baby. To look at those pictures and to think, what happened? How did that become this? Just one slight moment at a time through all of this transformation. And yet I remember being me all the way through. When I tell the story, I tell it from the same perspective from which I speak now, from which I see the world now. There is an unchanging you inside that is consistent and the same all the way through. And that you that is unchanging has always been looking for love, looking to feel it, looking to express it. That unchanging you has always been looking for knowledge and wisdom, for doing what is right and what is good, through whatever point of understanding it is sitting, always trying to express that highest ideal, that perfection that it can't see outside, that it can't find outside. And so it pushes, and it works, and it suffers, and it struggles through a body and through a mind to know its nature. It's time to give up these changing ideas of ourselves. It's time to give up these temporary notions of who we are and to begin to stand in that unchanging place and to look at each other and see that unchanging place, that we might know love, that we might see something unconditioned, that we might find wisdom, support, and strength, that competition will turn to cooperation, that instead of building a society and a world on conflict and pushing and winning, we start looking at each other's needs as our own needs, looking at each other's dreams as our own dreams, and understanding that we're one humanity, one unchanging ideal, looking through thousands of eyes, thousands of hearts, millions and billions of personalities, that one unchanging quest for divinity. The God of love is his own proof, Swamiji says. His ideal becomes one of perfect love, one of perfect fearlessness of love. The highest ideal of such a person has no narrowness of particularity about it. It is a love universal, love without limits and without bonds, love itself, love, absolute love. This fearlessness of love that comes through love alone, because love is the thing that brings everything into a oneness, everything into a harmony. This fear, this primordial fear that we've lived with so constantly, the fear of our smallness, the fear of our separateness, the fear of being confronted with that separateness, being unpopular, being beaten up, being small in the face of this other that's gigantic that we somehow call God, but have no indication of what that is, where it comes from. Love is what brings that all together. Love is what gives us fearlessness. Love, the knowledge of this unity, of this indestructible, unchanging self within. Putting our identity on that. That's what Jesus meant when he told that wonderful story about the foolish man who builds his house on the sand and the wise man who builds his house on the rock. What's he talking about there? He says the fool builds his house on the changing, on this world, on the notion of being a man or a woman, on the notion of being rich and poor, on the notion of being white or black, American or other. That is the fool who builds his identity on things that change, things that are not permanent, things that cannot be depended on, the things in your identity and in your body that have changed consistently as you've toured time. The fool builds on those ideas. The wise man builds on the rock, the unchanging self, that which is listening and watching, that which uses the mind, that which sings the song through the mouth and vocal cords, that you behind it all. Build your identity on that and find wisdom, find realization, find knowledge, find fearlessness, and at last, find freedom. What is this knowledge? The master is talking to one of his devotees named M. What is Vijnana? Vijnana means that higher knowledge, that ultimate knowledge. It is knowing God in a special way. The awareness and conviction that fire exists in wood is jnana, is knowledge. So being able to look at a piece of wood and understanding that within it exists the potential for fire, to look at a human being and know that within it exists the potential for divinity, for this sainthood. The awareness and conviction that fire exists in wood, this is knowledge. But to cook rice on that fire, to eat the rice and to get nourishment from it. This is Vijnana. This is the ultimate knowledge. So to know at the beginning that yes, within me is this divinity, yes, within me is this potentiality of God, of the divine, this possibility of pure love, this possibility of wisdom. That's the beginning. Yes, that is knowledge. That has set your boat in the right direction. But when you learn to use it, when you learn to stand on it, and it removes your fear, and it removes your insecurity, and it removes your suffering, and it gives you the ability to serve without expecting something in return. When it stops you counting the number of nice acts that your friends have done for you so that you can be sure and do the same number back again to them. When you begin to realize that this exchange is for fun, it has no meaning. There is nothing real to be taken from this world. It's the first lesson we learn. A baby is born with nothing. And a man and woman dies with nothing. What can you take in between those 2 points that has any meaning whatsoever? What can you collect? What can you draw to yourself that you're not going to have to leave behind? It's the first lesson of life. So why build so much stress about getting and losing? Why work so infinitely hard at collecting? It's the curse that came from the Garden of Eden. You know, this idea that Eve and Adam, both of them, eating of that fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, what was that? It was that separation from God. There was no good and evil when there was God and God alone, love and love alone. It was when that separation happened and I decided, this is me, I'm in charge here, and whatever that is over there called God, it's over there. I run this life. I determine my needs and wants. And God said, that's fine. But to live like that is to walk out of paradise, to walk out of freedom, to walk out of harmony, to walk out of bliss. And if you continue to pursue that ideal, he says you're going to toil at the soil of the earth for the rest of your days, trying to fulfill those desires, because you're filling your hole with nothing. You're filling your emptiness with dreams. The way back into that garden, there was another tree, the tree of immortality, but you can't get there. Why? Because he put that cherubim at the gate with the flaming sword. What is that flaming sword? Desire. The idea that you can get something. The idea that you can add something to yourself. That is the sword that keeps you from entering your own inner paradise, Eden, which has never left you, but you have left it with your consciousness and your thinking. To go out through the senses, to look at that fruit, that forbidden fruit, and say, it's beautiful to the eye. It looks like it would be good to eat. Maybe it will give me wisdom. Maybe it will make me like God. Those are the things that Eve said as she looked at that fruit, as she thought this is the answer. And then she takes it and shares it with her husband, who eats it just the same. And in that pursuit of stepping into the body and stepping into the mind, these limited ideas of ourself, oh, how hungry we are, how desperate we are to be filled up. Knowing immortality intuitively, because it's our nature, we bring it into this world with us. Knowing that intuitively, we try to paint the infinite. We try to create the immortal. We try to find the security of being immortal in mortal things. We try to find our fulfillment in things that disappear. We buy that new car, and for the trip home from the car dealership, boy, is it awesome. And then you park it at Safeway and you come out and someone's keyed the door. And suddenly that's half the value. It's like, it's ruined. And in 10 years, you need another one. And even if you kept it in the garage the whole time and just went out every morning and looked at it, eventually, if it doesn't turn into rust and a bucket of potting soil, you will. And what have you gotten? What have you done? Vijnana is to know the nature of this world. It's to know the love that exists within you is infinite, and that you no longer have to parcel it out only to those who deserve it. It's to know that your wisdom is full and complete, and you don't have to act out of hunger and thirst and need, because your contentment, your Garden of Eden, your beloved paradise, has always been there, quiet, unchanging, unmoving. But you have been watching the change and the flickers and the colors and have been drawn out of your Eden, drawn out of your contentment, drawn out of your fullness, to believe yourself to be partial, to be hungry, to be thirsty. The awareness and conviction that fire exists in wood is knowledge, yes, but to cook rice on that fire, to eat rice and get nourishment from it, this is Vijnana, the higher knowledge. To know one's inner experience that God exists, that's knowledge, yes. To know through your inner experience, this is the important thing in Vedanta. It's not important what you believe. It's important what you know and find to be true by an objective and careful and concentrated study of what is the experience of being. After a very short time of making that concerted effort, you come to suspect there's something to this. And as more unveils within you, as your perspective of the world begins to change, then you come to know there is something here. Yes, to know by one's inner experience that God exists, this is knowledge. But to talk to him, to enjoy her as child, as friend, as master, as beloved, this is the highest knowledge. The realization that God alone has become the universe and all the living beings. This is Vijnana, the highest knowledge. To know that you are dreaming in a dream of your own making. This is the highest knowledge. To know that this point of perspective that you've chosen as the dreamer to enjoy the dream is not real. You cannot be hurt, though you may feel the fear. You cannot be hungry, though you may feel the pangs. It is all a story, all a dream, a sequence of thinking, a sequence of thoughts that your mind shows to you, the unchanging, ever free, ever pure, beloved self, the object of worship to that tiny self trapped in the dream, thinking that it's real. The lover has passed beyond all these things, beyond rewards and punishments, beyond fears and doubts, beyond scientific or any other demonstration. Sufficient unto him is the ideal of love. And is it not self-evident that this universe is but a manifestation of this love? What is it that makes atoms unite with atoms? What is it that makes molecules unite with molecules and causes planets to fly toward each other? What is it that attracts a man to a man to a woman to a woman, or a woman to a man? What is it that attracts animals to animals, drawing the whole universe, as it were, toward one center? It is what is called love. Its manifestation is from the lowest atom to the highest being, omnipotent, all-pervading is this love. What manifests itself as attraction in the sentient and the insentient, in the particular and in the universal, is the love of God. It is the one motive power that is in the universe. That's a beautiful statement. I've spent so much time thinking about that and just dropping off one misunderstanding of it or another. To know that everything in this universe is motivated by one thing, and that is love. How much that has helped me to understand people that I got in arguments with, people that I thought disliked me. To know that all of their dislike was a manifestation of love in some odd way that excluded me. And if I could take the time if I could put aside my own ego division and sit next to that person long enough to see the nature of the love that they're expressing through what is hurting me, then I can connect. Then I can be with them. And maybe together we can step forward. Because wisdom and learning are never one way. Every argument teaches both sides. But start that argument knowing that what your opponent is asking for is the same as what you are asking for, but from a different understanding of self, a different understanding of personality, a grasping to something finite and small, but that it's a reflection of love itself, the divinity within. It is the one motive power that is in the universe. Under the impetus of that love, Christ gave his life for humanity, Buddha even for an animal, the mother for the child, the husband for the wife. It is under this impetus of the same love that men are ready to give up their lives for a country, and strange to say, under this impetus of the same love, that a thief steals and the murderer murders. This is one of the hardest things to understand, and one of the things that I was most afraid of believing, that the most heinous crimes of humanity could be observed through love. And yet that's the perspective of the sages. That's why they can love without condition. That's why they can give an infinite forgiveness, an infinite mercy, because they can look at the most heinous action and understand the misunderstanding through which that love is flowing, that refracted it into something so particular and so peculiar that helped maybe only one and destroyed millions. To be able to understand in this world that everything is done by love, what a transformation that would be. Where is your fear in a world like that? Where is your hatred in a world like that? Where is your insecurity in a world like that? Where's your need for more of anything in a world like that? The Master said to the devotees, Sri Ramakrishna said, "It will avail you nothing unless you realize Sat Chit Ananda, unless you realize that inner nature. Come to realize this unchanging self, to pull yourself out of mind to the stillness behind it, to pull yourself out of this changing perspective of the senses to that unchanging immortal perspective of the self who stands and observes. This Satchitananda, this existence, knowledge, and bliss. There is nothing like discrimination and renunciation, he says. This discernment, this learning, he says that which is changing is unreal. The unchanging alone is real. Touch that unchanging self, find it, discern. If you find something that's grabbing you, that's changing, let it go. Understand there's nothing there. It's the moving dream. It's the colors on the white screen of the movie. And renounce, let go. Not because you're giving up something, but because you're moving towards something infinite and beautiful. Something that can at last stand firm in all of your changing anxieties. There is nothing like discernment and renunciation. The worldly man's devotion to God, it's momentary. It's like a drop of water on a red-hot frying pan. Perchance he looks at a flower and exclaims, "Ah, what a wonderful creation of God." But as soon as the flower is behind him, the thought of God is behind him. To find this unchanging place is a thing that will change every thought of your mind, every experience of your day, every goal of your heart, every thought about the other in all of its forms. Vivekananda, in his book Raja Yoga, he says, the mind, to have non-attachment, must be clear, must be good, and must be rational. So this clarity, that is not to be disturbed by any sense of need or sense of want or sense of desire. This goodness means that knowledge that all things are born of love, and always insisting on the highest, that everything is in fact working together to bring you to wisdom, to bring you to this realization of your divinity, of the beauty that lies in your heart. Just as a selfish act, impossible. Because when you know yourself, that will be the self you project on everyone else. The imperfect self that you know now is the imperfect self that you're projecting on everyone around you. And that is why you assume love and hate, why you assume good and evil, right and wrong, because you see them in yourself. When you come to know this unchanging divinity within you, that's what you will see around you. That's how the world will appear to you. The mind, to have this non-attachment, to be able to separate from body, separate from mind, separate from the changing, to be established in what it knows, must be clear, good, and rational. Why should we practice? Because each action is like the pulsations quivering across the surface of a lake. The vibration dies out, and what is left? The samskaras, the impressions. When a large number of these impressions are left on the mind, they coalesce and become a habit. It is said that habit is second nature, but it is also first nature and the whole nature of man. Everything that we are is the result of habit. That gives us consolation, because if it is only habit, we can make and unmake it at any time. The samskaras, the impressions, are left by these vibrations passing out of our mind, each one of them leaving its result. Our character is the sum total of these marks. And according as some particular wave prevails, one takes that tone. If good prevails, one becomes good. If wickedness, one becomes wicked. If joyfulness, one becomes happy. The only remedy for bad habits is counter habits. All the bad habits that have left their impressions are to be controlled by good habits. Go on doing good, thinking holy thoughts continuously. That is the only way to change these base impressions. Never say that a man is hopeless, because he only represents a character, a bundle of habits which can be checked by new and better ones. Character is repeated habits, and repeated habits alone can reform character. So take this very simple idea here. Believe in yourself again. Believe in yourself and your ability to become what you've always wanted to be, to manifest what you've always wanted to see in that mirror. Believe again and change the habits that have destroyed that belief in you. One by one, little by little, that's practice. It might take years. It depends and measures only according to your earnestness and sincerity in the attempt. Perhaps you enjoy suffering. Perhaps it gives you some sense of payment or satisfaction. That was one of the most difficult things for me to learn. You know, I was diagnosed in 2008 with severe depression. So there you have it, a monk in a monastery with severe depression. That was me, and I sat there and I thought, oh my God, you know, everything is dark, everything is bad, everything is horrible. And when as I started to try and change my habits, to try and change my way of thinking, little by little, to really take this ideal of divinity and have it become real in me, I found there was a part of me that got its self-value by being miserable, because somehow I was paying for being this type of person, being of this orientation, being of this whatever, that I found in me something needed or wanted that misery, because somehow being miserable made me feel deeper, made me feel like I understood better, became a unique thing that I attached to and called me and mine. You have to give yourself permission to let go of the way that you've defined yourself. You have to give yourself permission to understand that maybe what I think I am has nothing to do with me at all. And you may have invested a great deal of your life into being what you think you are. And it may seem very expensive to you to let go of that, to make a change. But you can know that it's not nearly as expensive as taking your delusion to the grave, is taking your misunderstanding all the way through your life so that the ripples of that misunderstanding destroy or affect in a negative way the lives of people around you. All because you couldn't forgive yourself. All because you couldn't love even yourself first. Give yourself this permission to change your habits, to begin a new page, even if the entire life you've written thousands of pages before it. Throw it out. Start again. What's in the past is in the past. You can't eat it, you can't taste it, you can't touch it. It's only a concept in your mind at this point. It's no more valuable than any other thought in that brain. Let go of it. Become what you want to become, what you've known that you've always been. Love without a condition, without a reason. Give beyond your means to someone that doesn't have, because you know that it's you that's suffering through them. One of the beautiful sayings of Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, he says, when a worldly man looks at someone suffering, he sees someone suffering. He says, but when someone who knows who they are looks at a person suffering, they suffer because they know that same changeless self that's looking through their own personality is looking back at them through the suffering's eyes. And in that knowledge, your service becomes pure. You're not giving to somebody, you're worshiping. So you're not above them. They won't learn to resent you because you're the giver and they're the taker. You won't become proud because you won't measure, because you're giving from yourself to yourself. And your service can be pure, and it can be right, and it can be wholly yours. And the bliss that's born of that is the bliss of that unchanging immortal self, the bliss that any other action distracts you from, covers up with craziness in the mind, and gets you trapped in the world of the changing and the mortal, trying to find your way out. We must strive to overcome inertia with activity, and then to submerge them both in balance. In the original language, we must strive to overcome tamas with rajas, and then to submerge both in sattva. Get up, go out and serve. These are the words of Vivekananda. Hafiz closes with a beautiful poem, Where Dolphins Dance. Again, the work starts as soon as you open your eyes in the morning. Hopefully you got some good rest last night. Why go into the city or the fields without first kissing the friend who always stands at your door? It takes only a second. Habits are human nature. Why not create some that will mint gold? Your arms are violin bows, always moving. I have become very conscious upon whom we all play. Thus my eyes have filled with the warm, soft oceans of divine music, where jeweled dolphins dance and then leap from me out into this world. Take a few moments to think about these things.
fly through the white moon, sing through the night, surrounded by music and golden light. Love in your heart will bring your soul home. Within you can find all you've ever longed for. Aleo, 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 aleo.
Beautiful. All right, well, I am your evidence that habits can change. I think that's the first lecture I finished in less than an hour. Probably the last one in here to realize that. All right, well, I remind you, this place is yours. And you've built it, you sustain it, and you make it your own. And this struggle can get hard, and times can get really tough. And come here. Anytime, it's open every day, as many of you know. Spend some time with your ideal. Sit there thinking of love and wisdom, stillness and peace. Fill yourself up here, and if you see someone around, give that love. This is your laboratory, your petri dish for experimenting with love, for experimenting with giving and selflessness, where hopefully nobody will misunderstand. All right, so we have these Sunday talks going on every Sunday here. Next week on the 25th is the joy of drunkenness. There we go. All right. Swami Arupeshananda is going to juggle that ball. So, all right. Well, the title will get somebody here for sure. All right, we have classes and other events Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Our Spiritual Treasures by Pravrajika or Swamini Krishna Prana. Saturday the 10th is done. And there we go. Saturdays at 5 p.m., the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We did one yesterday, and there'll be one next week. On October 1st, this is next month, is Durga Puja, the worship of the Divine Mother. On the 15th is the Diamond Jubilee of the 75th anniversary of the convents in the Sri Ramakrishna order. So this being a convent filled with the divine feminine, the Swamis residing here. I don't think all of them have been here 75 years. I know some of them have, but anyway, come and be a part of that celebration. After we greet each other at the back door, I'll come back in, and if anybody has any corrections or questions or answers or commands, I'm here to hear them. We can have a nice conversation, hopefully. So to that end, Jai Ma, Jai Thakur, Jai Swamiji, Jai Buddha, Jai Jesus, Jai Rama, Jai Krishna. Hey, Durga. Oh, you're the mic woman, I see. All right, any thoughts or ideas? Questions? Yeah, we have to use the mic just because I guess this is being streamed, and if we, then they can't hear the questions.
So I've been coming here for a little more than half a year or so. I'm curious about the presence of Ramakrishna here. And I haven't actually sort of experienced that directly.
All right. Concerned in what way?
I'm just curious about how I might be affected by, I wonder sometime in meditation, having sort of show up and say,
Yeah. Of course, talking about Ramakrishna, you're going to get any color depending on who's answering the question. For me, Ramakrishna is permission to seek the divine in any way that you think is productive and helpful to you. When I don't really see a person named Ramakrishna when I look there. I see my childhood Jesus, I see my college Buddha sitting there, that his face is the face of every seer, of anything that represents love in its purest form. And his teachings are that way also, that he doesn't want you to necessarily change your religion. He wants you to, Vivekananda in his first address in the West when he first got here, he said, I don't come that a Hindu become a Christian or a Christian become a Hindu or a Buddhist become, a Muslim. He says, God forbid, I come that a Christian is a better Christian, and a Muslim a better Muslim, and a Hindu a better Hindu. And so it's this notion of really getting past the forms and finding that spirit, that inner meaning, and to take it out of the words, take it out of the creeds, take it out of the churches and out of the temples, and expand your practice so that it includes your whole life, that it's not just something you do once a day for an hour or 2 hours or whatever, but that it becomes the way you live. I think that Ramakrishna is every man, every woman, that ideal inside, and he just reminds you of that ideal that's inside you and empowers it. If he sees any flame of good in you, you can know that he'll fan it eagerly and happily, and just go for increasing it until it consumes you. He's not going to run after what needs to go. He says that will go of its own accord. Take one step to the west, you'll automatically leave the east behind, he says. So, him being here, it is fascinating. It's almost as fascinating as me being here. But every time I get up to do a lecture and I look down and see myself in an orange skirt, I'm always taken aback a little bit. I'm like, wow, okay, that happened too. I think, that's been my experience in Ramakrishna is constant surprise. Constant surprise. So, yes, indeed.
On that note, I also don't know very much about Ramakrishna. I have a sense of other teachers that have passed away, like Ramana Maharshi or the Maharaj. Maybe because I have been on YouTubes that had an interchange of them, but I don't know Ramakrishna. I totally respect that he was even like a Mahaguru,
Mm-hmm.
of an enlightened being that was a little bit more influential. So it's in me, I recognize him as an enlightened being and very powerful. But I don't know about him like I know about others. And I think that when he is talked about as, I totally agree with what you said, and that relates to a guru and your respect for a guru, and that's what one should have. But on the other side, I want to know who he is, and the only parts that I get is things that are unusual that other people have heard from and then there's kind of a humor that goes along with it, and they're not really talking about who, I don't have a sense of who he was as a person. And that I would like to have.
Okay, well,
sense.
there's of course, have you read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna?
No, I haven't, but I have dyslexia, and that has never prevented me from understanding that world,
Right.
and or the rest of the world that I have to function in. But I don't get the written word. In fact, I don't understand when you read and read poetry, or if you just go. I don't have a picture that goes along with it, and so it goes. So half the thing, I like what you say, but half the things I have no idea what you said.
Right.
And I don't get any part of that part. It doesn't go in. I only get when somebody's talking from the heart.
Yeah. Well, Ramakrishna, you kind of have an advantage because I think that he intends to be seen somewhat in the way that you see him. He described himself when somebody says, "Who are you? What are you?" He simply says, "I'm a hole through which God can be seen." So it's not about Ramakrishna, and he very clearly states that he didn't come to start a new sect or to start a new group of Ramakrishnians. That these forms and identities is really desperately not the point. So some of the fascinating things about him, and the things that fascinated me anyway, is one, that in Hinduism, the very earliest scriptures say that truth is one, though the sages have called it by many names. And they talk about the eternal religion as like a jewel where each facet is one of the world's religions. And through all of those religions, the jewel can be appreciated, but no one facet is the jewel. Ramakrishna also said that, but then he took the second step in that after he realized God through his Vedantic path, he went and practiced Christianity to demonstrate that the same realization could be reached through the teachings of Christ. And then he went back and went with Sufism and practiced the teachings of Sufism until he came to a realization to show that through the teachings of Islam that God could also be reached. So his openness wasn't in words, and it wasn't just for the sake of being broad and the sake of being open. What he did offer was a common cosmology that could demonstrate this unity, so that there's lots of religious movements where we just kind of say, "Oh, religion is one," and boom. But the underlying cosmology that supports that idea, the depth, isn't equivalent to the breadth. And I think one of the unique things in my experience with Ramakrishna is that you can go down and say, well, why is that true? How is that true? And there's answers for that. Like I say, Ramakrishna is the religion of all religions, and not even just religions. I mean, there's even his teachings. For practices for atheists, people who don't believe in God, don't want to believe in God. That for him is not an issue at all. So he really, his teachings really are much more about finding the good in yourself and feeding that, fanning that. He's not going to look at what's wrong with you. He's not going to pay attention to the things that you're doing that are unhelpful to you. He's going to find the good that you are doing and throw his whole self into feeding that and enlarging that and fanning that flame until everything else is burned up in it. goes away. So it's just that insistence on the beautiful and that refusal to talk about or recognize the wrong, the sin, the evil. Because he says you become what you think. If you call yourself a sinner over and over and over again, a sinner you will become, he says. But if you go inside and look for that divinity within and pay attention to that divinity and do the practices for clearing the mind and for getting rid of your old habits and the marks of your mistakes and the unhelpful things that you love, that for him sin is not a concept, it's obvious. It's those things that hurt you and are unhelpful to you. So he's not interested in looking at them and defining them and making you pay for them as much as he's interested in you looking at them and discovering that they're not helpful, discovering that the desire you have for them is very thin and easily broken, and that the thing you are searching you already have, and that it's your searching for it that's preventing you from enjoying it. You know, you start from the idea, I don't have, and so you don't have. He says, start from the point that I am ever free, I'm ever pure, I'm ever blissful, and manifest that. Discover its truth. Yeah.
Actually, I agree with that. I was thinking, so it sounds so right.
Yeah, and I don't know if audiobooks are helpful. I know that they're online somewhere. Okay, yeah, there are audiobooks. Some British guy with a very nice accent reads it. Okay.
Can you expand on how evil actions are rooted in love?
Oh boy, yes, this is one we always go through. I can make an attempt at it. I always want to kind of hide behind the podium with this question. The way that that's been helpful for me to think about it is that all of us are on a spectrum going from purely material, where only the material is real, and the purely spiritual, where only the spirit is real. And on that spectrum, at this end, you could take someone like a Hitler, who had an ideal, but it was rooted in the material, rooted in the color of your hair, your ethnicity, your background, whatnot, that was his highest ideal. And so his service to that ideal helped people that managed to fit within that very narrow description of perfect, but it harmed millions of others. At the other end of the spectrum, we have a Buddha or a Jesus or a Rama, where they're spiritually identified fully. And their efforts, there were those people that disliked Jesus. They crucified him. So there were a small number of people that just couldn't hear what he had to say. But in essence, his service helped millions for thousands of years, as a teaching in and of itself. So all of us are somewhere in between those two endpoints. So what we love and what we go after, it really depends on what we think of our own self and our own nature. So when a person does something to someone else, there's several ways to look at it. I mean, when he may love power, and so his dominance of you is an expression of his love for power. He may love his family, but he has not enough money to feed them, so his stealing of your television is a reflection of his love for, feeding his family. It's, it goes much deeper than that, but that's the surface essence of it, that all of us are only motivated by love. Depending on our perspective of self, that light of love that is ourself goes through a prism called personality, goes through a prism called mind. And, you can also see it as being, when you marry one man or one woman, you've inadvertently rejected billions of others. So to the degree that those others wanted to marry you, to that degree, they'll feel that pain. So your act of love for your wife can also be interpreted as an act of rejection for everybody else. And so, but it's rooted and sourced in love. So the sages say that one of the beautiful things about enlightenment is that that motive of love will be the thing that you see first, always. And that's where the love equanimous comes from, the love without condition comes from, because you understand the nature of all that you see.
Another question, is there something higher than moksha?
Higher than moksha? Oh yes. Well, I know nothing of these things. Let me say that first, but I will give you a quote from Swami Chidbrahmananda, who was the spiritual child of Ramakrishna. He says that spiritual life begins at nirvikalpa samadhi. Now, for us, nirvikalpa samadhi is presented as the very highest realization. That's the complete absence of any sense of ego self at all. He says that that's just the beginning of spiritual life. What that means, who can say? If there's no longer a self, if everything is one without a second, what does that begin? Well, it begins something that we can't put into a mind. It begins something that we can't take in through our senses. So there's nothing to be said about it. Nothing could be said about it. So yes, there's definitely something higher than moksha. The beauty of it, the simple way I like to look at it as a bhakti, as a devotional person, is that God is infinite, and you're going to fall in love with her forever. You're never going to know her to the point where she does what's expected, or he does what's expected, or that does what's expected. That God is always going to inspire more love in you than he ever has before. And that will go on ad infinitum, as long as, well, maybe, again, if there's no one falling inside of someone else, then what else can you say? But that notion that love will never be fully known. It will always continue to be expansive. Even when you think you've reached a limit, it will show you there is no limit. All right. That's it from the online world. Yes?
Can you speak about love and fear, how they, I guess, interplay with each other in our lives?
Sure. Yes. I mean, to the degree that we believe in our ego self, to that degree we're afraid. Now, most of us have suppressed that and distracted ourselves from that to a very successful degree, that we don't realize that our one of the first emotions we've had was fear. Vivekananda said, as soon as you became aware of other, fear was born in you. So that fear manifests in all of our mental illnesses, and all of our desires and all of our hungers, really. All of our desires are to cover that, you know. All of our desires are trying to express what we intuitively know by our nature in a material world of limits and restrictions. So your personality, all of our personalities, are just collections of restrictions and limitations. Those things that we like countering the things we don't like. And all of that is driven by, fear is kind of the opposite of love. As you look for these things or find your fulfillment in these things, you're driven by love. But you can also say that love has behind it a fear that you're moving away from, the fear of your particular, the fear of your smallness. So it really is the nature of this universe. I mean, it is the non-existent counter to the only existent love. You know, fear is, there's nothing real that causes fear. It's always the unreal that causes fear. So fear and ignorance are synonyms. No one's going to argue with that. All right.
Not specific. Okay, so when you started, you talked about nature, and I think that and the extreme that you're able to realize of nature. And I think that that's really important, because in this world, we make everything the same. And to separate that and to see the awe in this world that we live in is extremely important, and we don't. So then I ask myself the question, why don't we? Because it's really the lower chakras were not connected to Earth. And as time goes on, it goes into the computer. Once more, we moved. So maybe spirituality is about being really certain about who you are, and then you can give it up. And that would take the lower chakras to be developed, and I think that in our human development, we're actually going away from it.
Yeah, it's not. We don't develop chakras from my understanding of things, but we move through them from lower to higher. The image that was coming to mind as you were talking is this notion of looking in the mirror. You can look in the mirror and love everything that you see, but it will always be in the mirror. You know, you can try and kiss the mirror as your expression of love for what you see. That kissing a mirror is never going to be fulfilling. It's never going to be a great experience. And we can continue loving the mirror and appreciating the mirror and pursuing more knowledge about the mirror. But as long as we go that direction, we're never going to find what's in the mirror. To find what's in the mirror, you have to come to that notion, everything that I'm seeing in there is here. That's the reflection, this is the real. So to bring that down, the mirror is the mind. And everything that this watcher, this witness, looks at in the mind, it falls in love with and it wants, because its nature is love, its nature is wisdom. So it's always trying to go through the senses, trying to find those things in the mirror. You know, you look in the mirror, you want to see your youth, you want to see your beauty, you want to fix the things that aren't beautiful or the things that are out of whack. And so this is really the nature of it. You are that looking in the mirror of the mind, and you've become confused, thinking that you are the reflection. And by being the reflection, you are thinking that everything about the reflection can be attained through the reflection. But you have to come to some intuitive understanding at some point, because you're never going to see your own face. So there's nothing that you can objectify in order to come to that truth. There's everything that you do out here, you're going to see in the mirror, but it's not going to get your attention out here. You know, you're fixed in that. So that's what renunciation and discernment is about. It's intuiting yourself as the source of everything you're seeing in the mind. And to understand that when you stop being interested in mind, the mind will calm, and in that calmness of mind, you'll see the whole reflected. As long as there's any sense of me and mine, these two little fingers, in the waters of the mind, you're never going to get a reflection of the moon as its wholeness, as its oneness. You're going to see the multiplicity, the moon broken into ever-changing shards of flickering light in the water, and you won't understand that unity. When you remove me and mine from the mind, when you stop thinking this thought is mine and that one isn't, or I like this thought and not that thought, as soon as you can pull those two fingers out of that mind, it will settle on its own accord. The mind only stays active as long as you are interested in it. As soon as you lose interest by understanding that it's just reflection, there's nothing real there, then instantly it calms. And then that which was so elusive and impossible to see before is suddenly this still, whole reflection of the moon, unchanged. Beautiful ideas in the Upanishads. But that's the big one. You know, I've been reading for a while now. And It's kind of funny because in a weird way I have an embarrassment about this because I sort of always figured it was kind of pop spirituality. But Eckhart Tolle, in his book, The Power of Now, he really lays these things out in a very modern language and in a very touchable, examinable way without pulling in Sanskrit and parables and mystery and whatnot. He really gives you some very hands-on tools for experiencing some of these things. If you do some of the things he talks about, this whole idea of no thought was, I mean, that's everywhere in the Upanishads, but I never really caught it. I never really saw that. And when he talks about coming to this space where there is no thinking, where everything is spontaneous manifestation of this self, and not the mind telling you about the self, not the thoughts describing circumstance, not the thoughts telling you about the moment, but you actually experience the moment as it is. If you are in mind, if you're letting the mind tell you about the moment, you're living in the past. It may be a fraction of a second in the past, but you're always in the past because you're being told. You know, you wake up in the morning, you want to know how you feel. You ask the body, did you sleep well? No, I'm feeling tired today. Well, you're not feeling tired today. The spirit is never tired. The spirit was wide awake and watching all through the night. You know, you get up, you want to know what your attitude is. You ask the mind, am I in a good mood? The mind says, no, I'm in a bad mood. And so now the day is ruined. You know, you've defined your point of perspective as being negative, and so you're stuck in that for the day. So as long as we go to the mind to find out about the present moment, we're not going to experience the present moment. We're not going to see it as it is. And the problem with that is that the mind accumulates this information and it starts to tell you a story about who you are. And then you become attached to that story of who you are. And then it makes sure that you stay attached to that story. And then you hear that it's a story and it tells you, oh, it's very difficult to overcome this story, but don't worry, I'll take care of you. You know, that ego self rushes in. I'll fix myself. I'll do these practices. I'll do this praying. I. And suddenly you're trapped in religiosity, which then manifests judgment and smugness and self-righteousness. And the very practices that are meant to set you free are now loading your wagon with baggage. So it's quite tricky. You always have to, that's why they have that practice of not this, not this, not this, as opposed to this, 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 this. You know, if you go around saying, I'm God, that may be true in its ultimate sense, but when you say I, you're talking about the ego self. And if you're attaching that sense of ego to the sense of God, woo! Kids, you're going to turn into a monster, you know, a real monster. And so the sages say it's much safer to constantly back out. Say, I'm not that attribute, I'm not that attribute, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. And back in to the notion that you are in fact everything, but you're nothing in particular. I don't remember the question. But anyway. Okay, so I'm just talking. Yeah. No, this is beautiful, beautiful material. You know, God is just, if there's anything wonderful to talk about, this is it. You know, just the way you can always feel it inside. And when I remember when I first ran into the Vedanta, and I'm going to talk about that more in a second because there's something important to know about that. When I ran into the Vedanta, I constantly kept having this feeling that somebody had gone in and grabbed all of my aha moments, organized them, put them into an essay, and gave them back to me. You know, it's like, I was like, without knowing what I believed or what I thought all my life, I was reading these things like, oh yeah. No, I've always thought that. You know, in a weird way that sort of made me feel a little egotistical about it. It's like, oh yeah, I somehow knew that, but I couldn't have told you that. You know, so it was kind of that experience. But when I say the Vedanta, what do I mean? I mean anything that involves the spiritual quest. You know, it's not a particular. You know, it's not a religion among religions. It's the essence of all religion. So we're not throwing yet another thing on the table. We're saying, hey, everything on the table is ultimately one. Look at this. This is amazing. Set aside your ego that wants to be special because you're this, that, or the other, and look at what they all say. And now let's line up the things that this one says is most important with the ones this one says is most important. And you'll find, oh my God, look, they line up almost perfectly. And then look at the practices of each one of them, and you say, oh my God, look, every single one of them is trying to reduce ego, trying to reduce the sense of a particular self based on a body and a mind. Wow, that's incredible. And you look at all their practices and you see, look, all those practices are an effort to unify yourself with this notion of love, to find oneness. So all virtue is a movement toward oneness, and all vice is a movement toward disparity, difference. And that's just a 2-sentence summary of all ethics. Anything that moves you toward unity is virtue. Anything that takes you away from it is vice. So, yes.
You talked about you mentioned Hatha yoga, and recently I was in an Uber where the driver was of Muslim faith, and he said, well, I pray 5 times because I have to remember God 5 times. You can't remember, like every few hours, because I can't endeavor to remember enough because I forget so easily. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Mm.
And I just wanted to know what would be your thoughts on remembering God and loving God and knowing God and being with God.
Do it. Yes. No, the ideal is not to have a practice, but to be your practice. So anything that we start with, pray 5 times a day, great start. Meditate for an hour a day, great start. Feed 5 homeless people a day, great start. Any particular that you have that you move forward with, great start. But we're looking for someone who becomes their religion, whose motive and sense of being in the world is pure love, pure wisdom, in this beautiful mystery of being. That the isness that is them is the isness that is everything, the isness that is everything beautiful you've ever seen. And if you know that isness, everything you see is beautiful. Not that everything beautiful is seen, everything seen is beautiful. When that maturity is there, when that knowledge of self is there, there is no ugliness. Everything has its worth and its beauty in it. So like that only happens through constant awareness. Right now it's an awareness of God, because God, we have a sense of other. We know that there's no confusion to me that this is not me. As long as that is true, God exists. And my relationship with that existence of other, the closer it becomes healed through pure love, through pure understanding of the nature that makes us all exist, is but a dream within a unified being whose nature is love, existence, and a wisdom, knowledge. So, yes, these things are just the means. God is a means to God, because the God of the mind is never God. It's always a concept of God. And so by the very nature that you can conceive of your God, proves that your God is false. And so what we're trying to do is find the real God, which is what? Love. God is love. 1 John something something. And so I like to think of it in this shrine room of your heart, where you sit with the beloved. You've got your image of your beloved there, and you've got your image of you here. And both of those are false. And both of them will be consumed into the love that is formed as this falseness sees and begins to understand at least a dim reflection of perfect love in this falseness. And in the end, it's absorbed in the relationship of love that manifests between the two, until that love absorbs the sense of worshiper, absorbs the sense of the worshipped, and becomes simply one without a second. So you get lost in your concept of God, and your concept of God gets lost in you to manifest love alone. Yeah. And that's what life is for. That's why we're here, is for that to happen, or to recognize that it has happened. It's in that book by Suzuki, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. He says the Buddhist does not sit to realize God. The Buddhist sits to realize that they are already realized. And so that's the truth of it. That's why they say, thou art that. You know, there's what book is that? Vivekachudamani, maybe? Or Vedantasara. It's one of the, I always get those two mixed up. But he goes and gives this description of the perfect student in there. And I remember the first time I read that, you know, it was one of the first books I was given to read by Swami Prabhupada. Boy, that hurt so bad reading that. I was like, this is the perfect student. And I went to Maharaj and I was like, I'm leaving. I'm packing up and I'm leaving. I'm not even a student. I don't even qualify to be a student. And he said, yes and no, it's true. He says, but understand they're describing an ideal. He says, what happens when you have an ideal student? All the teacher has to do is lean over your ear and say, thou art that. Boom. You realize, you know, because you were perfectly ready for it. And as soon as you heard it, that truth went all the way down, fully digested, never to return to ignorance again. So that's the only thing. You aren't that because you don't believe yourself to be that. You aren't that because you have, when God said, I am, you provided him an almost infinite number of adjectives instead of just leaving it, I am. And Eckhart Tolle says this very nicely. Become aware of awareness. Actually, Ramana Maharshi says the same thing. Become aware of awareness. That if you want to feel this natural bliss that you have, stop paying attention to everything else and pay attention to paying attention. And if you are able to do that for even a split second, you will become aware of the natural bliss that is within you that you have blamed on conditions and objects for your whole life. You know, that Swami, I told that story before, we had one of the senior Swamis. Sometimes I wish I wasn't an airhead about names, but anyway, he came and had lunch with us and he was telling Swami Prabhupada, Maharaj, I've realized something very important about desire. And of course, Prabhupada was like, oh, what is that? He said, well, I've realized that when you fulfill a desire and you feel that joy, that happiness at having that desire fulfilled, he said, what has happened is not that you were given any enjoyment by the fulfillment of that desire, but because you have fulfilled that desire, it's out of your mind for a moment. For a moment, you're without desire. And in that moment of being without desire, you become aware of the bliss that is always silently present within you because you're not distracted for that moment. And the distance of time between not having that distraction and moving on to the next desire is the length of time that you find happiness. And you're going to blame that object or that event for that manifestation of happiness, when actually it was your removal of desire that allowed you to become aware of the bliss that is your nature until you were once again distracted by the next desire. And so that kind of fits into that question about remembering God. You know, remembering God kind of puts a brace on those desires and keeps enough space between them so that you can enjoy being alive for a second or two without being hungry or thirsty. Yes, enjoy being alive for a second or two if you're lucky. Yeah, because to enjoy life in truth, look at Ramakrishna. If you read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, he's in these ecstatic spaces, you know, where the mind short circuits, the body short circuits because the bliss cannot be processed. You know, that's in my own silly way, I was making that illusion with the beauty that I saw in the Rocky Mountains there, where literally I felt the inability of my senses to appreciate all of the beauty that was being presented to it. I could understand that I could not process all of the beauty I was seeing. I could feel the overflow. I knew that my bucket wasn't big enough. My senses were not capable of seeing what I was seeing. And, I didn't go into an ecstatic, I started crying, but it wasn't, and I felt a greater joy than I felt for some time in my life. But the ecstasy that Thakur felt when he realized his own, this love, the everything of everything, was the exact same thing, but he was able to let go of the body and mind and actually just be consumed in one without a second, lose that identity completely. And what made him an avatar, if you want to think of him that way, which is not required, but if you did, was the fact that he could come back again. He says that most people who have that experience, the body just drops away. They never return. Why would they? But an avatar or an incarnation, a Jesus or a Buddha, they can go into that experience and come back again. And, like that. Yes, sir.
Why are we not born self-aware? Why must we go through a journey to realize a connection to the love that is the essence of our universe and reality?
Yeah, good question. Nobody's answered that. None of the sages. The sages say that that's a question that only makes sense within the dream. If in the dream you want to know why you can fly, well, within the dream you can come up with your dream physics that explain your ability to fly. But when you wake up, you realize you didn't fly. So why explain something that didn't happen? And you understand that the physics itself was all a machination of the dream and has no importance. And so this question of why this within the dream is very valid and seems to demand an answer, but the answer to it is transcendent. The answer to the question is outside of the system that causes the question.
It's almost as if it is a dream.
Oh yes. Well, the sages...
Not something that you can quantify as matter or something, but part of the...
No, that's one of my favorite meditations. It is, in fact, dream. I mean, it's not of the same nature of a dream. Maybe I really can't say that with security either. But it is not real. There's no doubt about that. The sages all say that this isn't real in that sense. But if you think about it, you can come to that conclusion without having to go into high philosophy or religious belief. Just know your mind, your brain, is in a black box. It's in your cranium. It has never seen the light. I've said this so many times. The people who know me are rolling their eyes right now. It's like, oh God, here he goes. But your brain has never seen light, and it never will, as long as you're alive, most likely, see light. Equally, it has never been touched. Equally, it has never heard anything. Because anything that it hears goes in this ear and gets translated into some biochemical information that travels along the neurons and gets fed to a particular region of the brain that then creates a symbol, interprets that information, and creates a symbol to represent what it knows from that information. So the light that you see there is not what light looks like. It is your own mind's symbol for the information it got from your eyes that it has been called light. And so you have never been touched. That self within has never been touched, has never heard a song, has never been hugged, has never seen the light of day. It has only been within a mind, a symbol, presented with symbol after symbol after symbol to explain this incoming information. And further than that, you do not know the source of that information, because your ear is as much a symbol for the origin of sound as your eye is a symbol for the origin of light. So you do not live in a world, you live in a mind, and that mind is a set of symbols to represent something coming from where we do not know.
Sort of like quantum physics. Once you get to a certain level, it becomes a wave particle. It's no longer a particle, it is a wave.
Yes, yes, exactly.
It's not
Or it's both at the
solid.
same time. Yeah, you don't know. It's there's a wonderful New York Times article which somebody just challenged me to find the source, so I have to go back and do that this afternoon. But there's a New York Times article that was saying that they said reality so far looks like a big vat of black goo within which time passes forward and backward simultaneously, and which does not take form until it's observed. So, if you want the scientific answer to realization, it's black goo.
So there seems to be an element in our discussion that the component I call suffering, because we're trying to get, I don't like to use this term, but we're trying to get from point A to point B, B being the realization of love and the deeper context of reality. Does that make sense to you?
No. Because reality won't have a context. It is its own context. So it's one without a second. So you can't have a context for reality. The other thing is that this love, the Satchitananda, that love, knowledge, existence, absolute, those are just the last three things you'll say before you merge into this one without a second. So even that is not the reality. The reality has no components, has no composition. It's simply, it can't even say that it is, because there's no witness to describe it. There's no other. So the nature, we're talking about the nature of God. And the sages all say, like Ramakrishna, he says, when he was at one point trying to tell the disciples what he experienced in samadhi, and the way he said it, he said, as soon as I even make the attempt, mother stands on my tongue. It's like, he says that God is the only thing that has not been polluted by the tongue, meaning that God cannot be described, because all descriptions are limitation. All adjectives are restrictions, and the absolute has no restriction and no limitation. And so anything said about it is false. It's only mind that would dare to limit it. Not totally satisfying, but I'm afraid that's what all of the sages from every religion, even Christianity, say that. God in Christianity gets around it by saying, if I show myself to you, you'll die. So, all right. They're probably wondering where I am down at the convent. So, thank you very much for this beautiful time. Yeah, beautiful time together. I appreciate it. All right. Jai Ram.